Thanksgiving. I can't believe that it's only just 4 days until Thanksgiving. That's crazy. We are right at the tail end of a series called Don't Be That Guy. And because it's Thanksgiving coming up, I thought it'd be very interesting and very appropriate to talk about this word right here, and that is the word ingratitude. Would y'all say that with me? Ingratitude. Now, we all hate the feelings that are associated with this word because it's the same idea as being unappreciated, right? And we all hate the idea of being unappreciated just because it's the exact opposite of what we expect, and it's the exact opposite of what we think that we deserve. Because we do something for somebody else, we marry them, we raise them, we hire them, we work for them, we do something for somebody else. And in the end, to be honest, we kind of expect a little bit of something kind of in return. And when that doesn't get returned to us, it's a little easy for us to feel just kind of irritated, isn't it? I mean, let me ask you guys this, participation. How many of you guys have ever been accused of being ungrateful? Would you guys raise your hands? Like some people. Okay, let me put it to you like this. How many of you have ever been 13 years old? Would you go ahead and raise? Yes, exactly. So it's almost kind of like this. Have you ever talked with somebody else about being ungrateful? Have you ever had a conversation with somebody else that they're being unappreciative? Because the funny thing is this, that when you talk to somebody else, it's like a total surprise to them, right? They're like, what? No way. But the funny thing is this, that the person who's being ungrateful against, it's no surprise to that person because they've been throwing darts at that person's dartboard for years. You know, because if somebody comes to you and says, hey, I just kind of feel like you don't appreciate me, the first reaction that you and I are always going to have is this. What? No way. Oh my gosh. I totally appreciate you. I'm so grateful for everything that you've done for me. But here's the problem, and this is what we want to talk about today. That when you have these feelings of appreciation, but if you don't express those feelings of appreciation, then a lot of times there's something that's kind of wrong. If you don't express those feelings, or maybe can I tell you this, if you don't express those feelings of appreciation in a memorable way, because if you're walking through the hallway and just go, hey man, I just totally appreciate you, they're going to forget that, right? Or if you say that you appreciate somebody, but really it's couched in complaint after complaint after complaint, but hey, just wanted you to know, still appreciate you, like that doesn't really work, right? And see, part of the problem is this, that there is this canyon of disconnect between you and the other person because you have these feelings of appreciation, but the problem is that you're appreciating that person secretly. Or you're appreciating that person secretly kind of inside of your heart or inside of your soul. And so I think this is really important to talk about, not only today because it's, the week of Thanksgiving, but I think it's something that's going to be important every day of your life because it's going to affect every relationship in your life. And so here's the principle that I want to talk about right here, and that is this, that gratitude and ingratitude determines the level of satisfaction in all of your relationships. Isn't that true? That gratitude and ingratitude determines the level of satisfaction in all of your relationships. And part of the reason why we have to talk about this is because you and I can be so oblivious to some of these things, and we can go on our merry little way pretending like everything is fine, when in actuality, maybe it's not. If you have your Bibles today, would you turn to Luke chapter 17, verses 11 through 19. Luke chapter 17, verses 11 through 19. Whether you're sitting here in the cafe, would you all stand with me as we honor the reading of God's word today? Luke chapter 17, verse 11 through 19. Fascinating story. A story that I wasn't really all that familiar with, but I'm totally glad that I studied it right around this time. Luke chapter 17, verses 11 through 19, it says this. Now, on his way to Jerusalem, Jesus traveled along the road between Samaria and Galilee. And as he was going into a village, 10 men who had leprosy met him. They stood at a distance and they called out in a loud voice, Jesus, Master, have pity on us. And when he saw them, he said, go show yourselves to the priest. And as they went, they were cleansed. Verse 15. Now, only one of them actually came back, and when he saw that he was healed, came back praising God in a loud voice. He threw himself at Jesus' feet and thanked him, and he was a Samaritan. Verse 17, Jesus asked, were not all 10 cleansed? Where are the other 9? Has no one returned to give praise to God except for this foreigner, this Samaritan of all people? Then he said to him, rise and go, your faith has made you well. Before you sit down here in the cafe, would you turn to 3 people and would you just wish them a happy Thanksgiving? Okay, so here's what I want to do to start out. I'd love to give you a quick geography lesson about the Holy Land if you don't know this. So we're going to go ahead and put up the map. If you didn't know this, Galilee is a region that's way to the north. Judea is the region that's way to the south. And right in the middle is this area called Samaria. Probably the closest analogy that I could come up with for Samaria is, Fresno. Samaria is like Fresno. So San Francisco is way to the north, Los Angeles is way to the south, and Fresno is right in the middle. Can anything good come from Fresno? Like, I probably just offended a bunch of people, but that's okay. Now, if that isn't bad enough, what we find is that there's 10 men in this story who have leprosy. Now, part of the reason why we don't talk about leprosy very much is that leprosy is a disease that has been cured in our day and age. Awful disease. If you know anything about the Bible or anything about about this disease, you know that it's a horrible disease. But what I think is funny is that it's a horrible disease and not a horrible disease all at the same time. Because it's a disease that made it so that someone was unable to feel pain. Now, in the culture and in the day and age that we live in, we try and get away from pain as quickly and as much as we possibly can. And yet, what we begin to see in the life of the leper is that pain plays a very necessary function in the life of a person, because you can begin to lose fingers and toes and body parts and not even really feel that you're missing that. And that just seems to be very strange. What we begin to see is that pain plays a very important part in the life of a person. Now, if you're a leper, one of the worst things is not only the physical condition, but the emotional and the spiritual condition that you find yourself under as well. Because if you're a leper, that's almost like living in a prison without walls. You are separated from your family. You were separated from society. You were quarantined with all of these other lepers so that you wouldn't infect anybody else. And if a healthy person just so happened to come near you, what you had to do is you had to ring a bell and you had to say, unclean, unclean, unclean. And you weren't even allowed to worship in the temple because they didn't want you to infect anybody else. Now, all of a sudden, we see a situation where all of these lepers see Jesus coming at a distance. They are against the law in approaching Jesus, and so they yell out to Jesus this in verse 13 right here. They yell out, Jesus, Master, have pity on us. Now, if you read the Gospels at all, what you will find is that Jesus is always dealing with people and healing people in very, very peculiar ways, in ways that you and I wouldn't necessarily expect. You know, if you read the Gospels, Jesus heals a blind person, and he goes, Jesus, I'm blind. And Jesus goes, and he goes, that is so, I can see. You know, there's another time where somebody else is blind. Jesus makes a little mud mask for somebody else. He puts it on their face, and not only are they able to see, but they have real soft and silky skin after that too, which is very thoughtful of Jesus. In this situation, Jesus again heals someone in a way that I wouldn't expect. Because after watching too many made-for-Hallmark movies, what I would expect Jesus to do is, here you have a group of men off in the distance who are social outcasts. They are not allowed to have physical relationships with anybody else who is healthy. And so you would think that Jesus, being love himself, that he would cross those social barriers, that he would close the distance between himself and those other people, that he would take his healing hand, which would begin to glow in the dark, and that as he wiped his hand across the person's arm, that magically they would be healed. And yet Jesus doesn't do that. Jesus just kind of yells back from a distance. And what does he yell? He yells this right here in verse 14. When he saw them, he said, "Go, show yourself to the priest." And as they went, they were cleansed. Now, the strange thing to me is that it almost kind of seems like Jesus ignores these guys. It almost kind of seems like Jesus ignores these guys and goes on his merry little way. But in fact, what you have to do is you have to understand a couple things about this story in order to fully understand what's going on. So number one is this. If you didn't know this about culture and about, the times, number one is this, that the priest was the one who was assigned to give a clean bill of health. Let me say that again, that the priest was assigned to give a clean bill of health. So according to the Old Testament law, if you had a contagious disease, and let's say all of a sudden that contagious disease was healed, and now what you wanted to do is you wanted to assimilate back into society, there was one person's okay that you had to have, and that wasn't a doctor, that was the priest. So you had to go back to the priest, and the priest would be like, okay, let me check your blood pressure, don't cross your legs, say, I don't know what the priest would do, but the priest was the one who was responsible for giving you a clean bill of health and then allowing you to assimilate back into society. Number two is this right here. What we don't know is we don't know which priest Jesus is talking about. We don't know which priest Jesus is talking about. Because if he's talking about the priest that was in the temple of Jerusalem, what you have to understand is this is about a 2.5 or 3 day journey for the leper to go that distance. Now, whether Jesus is talking about the priest in Jerusalem or whether he's talking about the priest in the city, it almost doesn't matter, because just the fact that these lepers obeyed Jesus, even though they didn't know what was going on, was a huge, huge, huge thing. You know why? Because the leper probably would have been kind of like this. Oh, well, I thought you were going to heal me right now, but it kind of seems like you aren't going to do that. And you want me to go wherever? You want me to go to Jerusalem? You want me to go there to a place that I'm not even really quite sure that I'm going to be allowed into? Okay, well, I guess I'm going to do it. Yeah. And it would have taken a huge show of faith for that leper to be like, okay, well, something better happen between now and the time that I get there. Why don't you look at verses 14 and 15? Verses 14 and 15, it says this, and as they went, they were cleansed. So as they were walking along, I don't know if it happened gradually. I don't know if it happened instantaneously. All the Bible tells us is this, that as they went, they were cleansed, and then only one of them, when he saw that he was healed, came back praising God in a loud voice. What did he do? He threw himself at Jesus' feet and thanked him, and yet he was a what? He was a Fresnan, or a Fresnoan, a Fresnite. What do you call somebody from Fresno? I'm not quite sure. Okay, anyway, well, here's what you have. Here you have these 10 lepers. They were all healed by Jesus in this very peculiar way. And it's almost pretty interesting because after they're healed, what do? They go on their merry little way. They want to go home, right? They have toddlers to raise. They have a wife they haven't seen in a while. They have a bed that they want to sleep in at home. That it's almost kind of like this. If we had a soldier coming back from being deployed in Afghanistan, and let's say he was there for a couple years, if he forgot to do his debriefing, well, we wouldn't fault him for that because he wants to go home. He wants to sleep in his own bed. And this is what we see with these other 9 lepers. They want to go ahead and get on with their life. And yet, what we see is that there was only one leper that was a cut above everybody else. There was only one leper that decided to do his own thing, and it wasn't even Thanksgiving, and we don't know how long he had to go before he had to turn around. Did he have 1 hour? Did he have 6 hours to go in order to come back to Jesus? Did he have 1 day? Did he have 3 days in order to come back to Jesus? But this is so important for him, that before he goes on with the rest of his life, what he wants to do is he wants to come back to Jesus, and he wants to show his appreciation. He wants to show his gratitude for all that Jesus has done for him. What I want to do is I just want to say this, that every single one of us, no matter what you've accomplished, because as you look back on your life, from the first time you started your job to maybe even right now, the first time you started college to where it is that you're right now, baby, you've come a long way. And what I'm trying to say is that no matter what you've accomplished, and that no matter how disciplined you are, no matter how ambitious you are, each and every one of us can probably look into the rearview mirror of our lives and identify at least one person that helped us get where we're at. That it doesn't matter how good looking you are, it doesn't matter how hardworking you are, it doesn't matter how smart or talented you are. You and I are all here because of the kindness of strangers and also because of the kindness of other people in our lives. Now, this leper understands this, and so what he wants to do is he wants to go back to Jesus and he wants to thank him for everything that he's done. Now, I love Jesus' expression. It's a little bit unexpected to me, and yet I think maybe he even says it with a little smirk on his face, because he says this right here in Luke chapter 17, verse 17. He says this, Jesus asked, "Were not all 10 cleansed? Where are the other 9? Now, again, it's kind of unexpected to me that Jesus would say this, because you would think that Jesus would just be appreciative of the one, honestly. That if I were Jesus, that here you have this person who came back to thank me, and then I would thank him for thanking me, and I'd be like, oh, you're the appreciative one, you're my favorite, come here, I want to give you a hug. And yet Jesus doesn't choose to say that. He chooses to say something else. And he says this, "Were not all 10 cleansed? Where are the other 9? In other words, he's saying that there's something wrong with this picture. He's saying that there's something missing from this picture. It's almost kind of like this. Remember this when you were a kid? Your parents went to go take you to see Santa, and then there was this huge line to see Santa, and maybe there was an elf that came along the way and gave you a piece of candy. What did you do? You snatched it and you stuck it in your mouth, and your parent went, whoa, 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 whoa. Before you go ahead and eat that thing, they're like, what do you say? Right? It's the same thing with trick-or-treating. When you were a kid, you went trick-or-treating. You just snatched the candy right out of the bowl that was in front of you. And your parent was like, whoa, 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 what do you say? And why did they say that? Because every parent in the world knows that if you get something, that if you receive something, and that if there is not an expression of gratitude for that, there's something that's missing. There's something that's wrong. There's a circle that's yet to be completed. And so they're like this, what do you say? And you're like, I don't know. I'd rather have Starburst. And they're like, no, you're supposed to say thank you. And you're like, thank you. And why is that? Because it doesn't matter how much gratitude we're feeling. It doesn't matter how much we feel appreciative. If we don't express that thanksgiving, and if we don't express it in a memorable way, there's something missing, and there's something wrong. Now, as we look at this story, what you're going to find is that, of course, that one leper who came back is the hero of our story, isn't he? We all want to be like that one leper. But let's talk about the other 9 lepers for a second. If we were to catch up with the other 9, do you think they were like this? Well, Jesus, it was about time you healed me. Man, do you know how hot it was? Do you know how long I had to walk? I don't think they were like that. I think those other 9 lepers, I bet you they were grateful to Jesus, and I bet they were singing songs too. And I bet you that if we were to catch up with the other 9 lepers, and if we were to ask them, hey, are you grateful for what Jesus has done for you? What do you think their response would be? I think their response would be, well, yeah. Like, I'm totally grateful for what Jesus did for me. Very appreciative. And yet, here's the problem. Here's where we all get it wrong. And that's this principle right here. That when it comes to the other 9, that they felt it, but they didn't express it. That they felt it, but they didn't express it. You know why? Because life is busy. You move on. You have kids. You have homework. You have projects. You have to finish up that master's degree. You got to get on with life. And to us, we almost kind of seem like, well, is that really a big deal? Does God need me to stop and really be all that thankful? Like, does he need that from me? And it seems like that's pretty important to him, doesn't it? They were just going to move on with their lives. And this is what Jesus said. Where are the other 9? Weren't 10 of them healed? That there's something wrong. And this brings us to the reality of a very, very simple idea. And let me tell you, it's an idea that's currently impacting every area of your life. And it's simply this principle right here, that unexpressed gratitude actually communicates ingratitude. That unexpressed gratitude actually communicates ingratitude. Or another way of saying this is this, that the gratitude that you feel but don't express is actually experienced by the other person as ingratitude and ungratefulness. And here's the thing, you know what ingratitude is? Ingratitude is actually a subtle form of rejection, isn't it? You can actually ingratitude someone right out of your home. You can actually ingratitude someone right out of your heart. Have you thanked your mom recently? And it's like, thank my mom? What? That's what moms do. I don't need to thank my mom. She knows that I'm appreciative of her. Have you thanked him recently? And it's like, what? I don't owe him anything. He works for me. I give him a paycheck. Why would I have to thank him for anything? When it's almost kind of like this, I want you to think of the language that we even use around this idea of gratitude, that we don't just owe someone gratitude, but we owe them what? We owe them a debt of gratitude, don't we? Because unexpressed gratitude is actually a debt that you have yet to pay. Let me put it to you like this. Maybe some of you are grateful for something and you just haven't expressed that. Maybe some of you are in a position where you are no longer grateful for something, or you are no longer grateful for someone. It's kind of interesting because as a pastor, I hear people talk about this all the time. They come to me and they complain and they complain and they complain about their spouse. You know, and from the outside, their spouse kind of looks relatively normal, right? But I mean, I get it. Only you know the truth, that you're on the inside, you know, that you really married the bride of Frankenstein. And so I get that. However, if that's you today, what I want to do is I want to share with you something that has been changing my life, and it's something that's been changing my marriage. And that is a small little notebook right here. Somebody gave me just a blank notebook a couple months ago, and I call it my gratitude journal. And every single day what I've been doing is I've been logging one thing that I appreciate about my wife. So every day for an entire year, what I want to do is I want to be able to log every single day for 5 minutes something that I appreciate about my wife. And don't tell her this, but on Mother's Day or next Thanksgiving, I want to be able to give this to her. So what I do is I just write down, you know, things like, oh, I really love the way that your hair looked today, or I love the way that you interacted with the kids. Interestingly enough, on a Halloween, I wrote this down right here. I was reading a book called Option B. Option B is a book that was written by Sheryl Sandberg, who's the chief operating officer at Facebook. And it's about her dealing with the sudden death of her spouse and how she dealt with the grief and the tragedy of all of that. And, here's something that I wrote. I said, today I listened to the book Option B, and I was so grateful just to have you with me. I sometimes imagine myself at your funeral, and the only thing I can see is a widower with 5 children sitting on the front row with sunglasses. The only thing I can hear are the sounds of my own undignified grief. So today, I just took full advantage of you. Like, I didn't take advantage of her, but I just took full advantage of you. I held your hand today and I wouldn't let go. And I hugged you, unable to comprehend that our time together has a limit. So I was grateful today simply for you. One of the things, please don't do that. You don't have to live with me, so. Ushers, would you please escort that man out? Now, here's what I find is kind of interesting. What I find that's kind of interesting is that when I do eventually give her this book, you know what her reaction is going to be? Her reaction is going to be, oh, that's so thoughtful. Thank you so much for doing this. It's the nicest thing that you've ever done for me. I mean, besides the vacuum cleaner that I bought her like 3 years ago. But can I tell you, although I hope this book might have an effect on her, can I tell you, do you know who this book is having the greatest effect on? It's having the greatest effect on me. Because while before I had a tendency to kind of nitpick and get all bent out of shape about how she doesn't, hand wash my silk boxers anymore, or how now that she's in her 40s, it takes her a little bit longer to move the furniture around all by herself. While it was easy for me to get bent out of shape about all of those other things, you know what I find? I find that it's amazing what it can do by just focusing. Now I just seem to focus on just all the things that I'm grateful for. And it's kind of interesting because in this year of our marriage, since I've done this, nothing has changed about her. Nothing about her actions have changed. Nothing about her attitude has changed. And yet this is already shaping up to be the best year of our marriage. Why? 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 Because for 5 minutes a day, all I'm doing is focusing on the very thing, just the one thing that I'm grateful for. So here's a little application point that I have for you. That when it comes to this Thanksgiving, go ahead and hold hands around the Thanksgiving table and hold on tight. Yeah, I want you to give thanks for the food that you're about to eat. Give thanks for all the blessings that God has given you. You know why? Because sometimes just even acknowledging the blessing can be a blessing in and of itself. Why don't you bow your heads and pray with me?